I'm Mary Davenport, and we're going to have a panel here today on physicians who have transitioned into an NFP-only practice. So at first we're going to give our testimonies basically and our experiences of maybe converting from more ordinary women's health care into NFP-only health care or approaching Catholic health care. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Karen Poehailos. And Karen received her medical degree at the University of Virginia Medical School. She's board certified in family practice. She worked in this field in a Virginia clinic until recently, and then now she's medical director and clinical director of the Pregnancy Center of Central Virginia. And she's also on the USCCB National Advisory Board for NFP. And she's certified in FertilityCare and also a trainer in the Southern Star SymptoThermal Method.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I think what I'd like to kind of aim this at is, how many of you are physicians? Okay. Is anyone here because they want to be able to talk to their doctor about going NFP only and are curious about that? Or there you okay. I'm going to try to aim it at, and these will be available online so you could send your doctor to it, but also to kind of aim you at like what the transition looks like so you know how best to support them. I think that's probably a good way to go. I was a cradle Catholic. I still am Catholic, growing up in the heart of American Catholicism in Baltimore. But I was a convert to this teaching. I'd like to share a little bit of my story. My conversion was a Holy Spirit thing I wasn't asking for. I was several years out of residency. And I had 2 young sons at the time and a part-time family medicine practice. I was on the pro-life committee at my church. I felt I had everything together as far as the Catholic and doctor piece went. Then came the bulletin insert in our parish for Priests for Life, asking people to pray for doctors who prescribed contraception, which would be me. I almost walked out of the Mass because I'm one of those people who does look at the bulletin before Mass starts. I went back to the pro-life committee and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And they're like, oh, don't worry. Father's very nice, but he's a little off the rails on this one. We still love you and we're fine with you doing the pill because like we're all taking it. So it worked for a while, but it kept popping back into my head. I was back in Baltimore in October of 1995 for a family wedding. Pope John Paul II was there and we didn't have tickets for the Mass, but we were able to see his motorcade. And while waiting for it, I saw this sign along the parade route, Holy Father, we are entirely in agreement with your traditional teachings. I thought, oh great, here we go, I'm getting chased. But like everybody else along the parade route, I got his blessing and we thought that was it. However, within 6 months, I had embraced the teaching that I had initially dismissed. After doing med library research in the days before the internet, a confession that no one will forget, a meeting with the diocesan theologian, and a random sample newspaper with an ad for an NFP-only physician landing in my driveway, I decided that it was time to look at this because the Holy Spirit was hitting me over the head with a 2x4. I told my partners during Holy Week of 1996 that I was not going to prescribe contraception anymore in my practice. You pick Holy Week because you need all the grace you can get for the conversation. They supported my decision. They probably did not understand it. One of the other physicians in the group was Catholic, and he just had never heard of a doctor not prescribing contraception. Patients took it variably well. Some were angry because I was the only female at that practice site, and if they wanted their pills refilled, they needed to see one of the males in the group, and they really wanted to see the female doctor. I could go into all the moves and the job hunting and the joys and frustrations and getting out to Omaha for NAPRO training, or trying to figure out how to do urgent care in a, how to do NAPRO in an urgent care with very little support clinically or clerically for all the labs and orders. I can answer some of those in Q&A, but I wanted to kind of give you my guide to NFP-only medicine. from all the mistakes I made. First of all, don't think you're going to be the practice that's going to save the world. I always looked at those offices where the doctor converted and they had more patients than they could handle, and they had to expand and get other docs to cover demand. I've never been there personally. I think it's probably a function of geography. I'm in the middle of the Bible Belt in Virginia. There are Catholic churches, but we have far more non-Catholics in our area. Also, probably because I don't do obstetrics in my practice. I chose after residency not to do OB because I was already expecting my first child, and I was figuring I was going to be the partially at-home parent, so part-time and OB can't fit in the same sentence. However, I've always been able to make a living, and but there was just never a need for a second NFP-only doctor in Charlottesville, so I was never going to be one of those amazing practices that landed on EWTN with, like, watch, you change your practice and they are going to be breaking your doors down. It's not about you. Second, it's not about you, it's about the Holy Spirit. I was convinced that if God had used the 2x4 on one of the family practice docs at the university, you could get a lot more people converted that way than picking a random mom who was working part-time urgent care. God knows what he wants to do and why. And in this case, why he chose me is totally up to him, but basically stay in your lane and let him do his job. Third, find a priest or several or an order who will help you walk the journey and support you in prayer. For me, it was initially my diocesan pastor when we were in Pennsylvania, and then after moving back to Virginia, it was the Dominican priests at my parish. They would listen to me scream about issues or job hunts, but then always remind me that this was the truth. Veritas is the Dominican thing for truth. Lord, to whom shall we go? Fourth, find a support group of like-minded physicians. Back when I first started, it was a listserv of NFP-only providers that provided my lifeline and the how do you treat X without the pill questions. How did you answer those? These were the days before Facebook, and there were days before Facebook. There were even days before the internet. Now the outreach is easier, and don't forget the Catholic Medical Association or other groups. Fifth, get the training you need to do the job as soon as you can. In my early years of practice, basically it was like, I don't do the pill, oh my gosh, what do I do now with this woman with irregular cycles or this situation or that situation? And I'd call on the listserv. I had some friends I could email or call, but when I was able to get out to Omaha and do the Natural Procreative Technology NAPRO course, for the Poehailos VI Institute, I had some answers and I had a toolbox, and I wish I had been able to do that earlier in my career. 6, realize that job searches may be messy and unfair. God sees all. You'll land where you're supposed to, even if you never envisioned the answer. I've applied and gotten to second interviews at jobs for which I was very qualified and would have been pretty lucrative positions, and their excitement would die when they heard about the one thing I couldn't or wouldn't do. I got angry, I cried, I got mad at God, and who seemed to be silent when I was hitting these walls. My current job, if anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be working for the Pregnancy Resource Center where I'd been a volunteer for many years as their medical director and clinic manager, I would have been incredulous. If the other jobs for which I had applied had hired me, I would have been there instead. So God knew what he was doing. I'm not saying it was easy. I'm just saying that he hasn't forgotten any of us who are trying to travel this. And 7th, surrender to divine providence. There's a great book by Claude Decousade, Abandonment to Divine Providence. It was the first book my spiritual director ever had me read. I've reread it several times since. Practicing this way forces you to let go and let God. When I shared with a priest recently that I was worried about my salary depending on donors because I now work for a nonprofit, he told me this was my chance to join St. Dominic in being a mendicant. Never thought of it that way. I am a lay Dominican, so I'm like, okay, I guess I can't grumble about this one. I have to learn to pry any semblance of control out of my tight fist and sit in the lap of my Heavenly Father and let him care for me and for all of us. If this sounds like I have it all together, I lied. I'm still a piece of work in this, even though I'm about 20 years into this journey on NFP-only medicine. But I do find it's an exercise of growing in grace. If any of you are looking at supporting doctors who are considering this, there are tons of us more than the three of us up here who are more than happy to help or offer advice or offer a hand or offer a sounding board. And I hope this may help some of you, or may help someone start the journey if you're watching this when it's recorded, or to support someone who is. And thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. So I'd now like to introduce April Lind. She went to the University of Minnesota Medical School. She has a master's in physiology and biophysics from Georgetown. She's certified in internal medicine and pediatrics, and in her private practice in the Maple Grove Clinic in Maple Grove, Minnesota, she helps women and couples understand and use NFP for their health and fertility. She's certified as a medical consultant in the Creighton Method and also in FEM.
Thanks for the invitation. It's hard to follow that. She did a very good job. I'm not sure I'm going to be as eloquent. I think I just responded just because everybody has a path, and I think the one thing that always gives me hope is what before Benedict became the Pope, as Cardinal, he said, "There's many paths to heaven as there are people on earth." And the one thing that always impresses me in coming to conferences like this, or the IRM or the AFCP that was before this, is everybody has a story, everybody has a path, and when you listen to it, you just hear the Holy Spirit sort of sprinkle throughout. So Dr. Poehailos' comments about when the Holy Spirit hits you upside the head with a 2x4, you kind of know when it happens, and you sort of either have to listen or run the other way and go crazy. So I'd suggest listening. So I too am a cultural Catholic. I'm half Irish, half Italian. My uncle's a priest. My parents got divorced when I was in 6th grade, and that was sort of the end of Mass. I was lucky enough to have First Communion. Went to college, found some good Catholic friends, dabbled a little bit with my faith, didn't really understand it. Got into medical school. Actually, I had an opportunity in college. I was really restless. God was probably working on my heart at that time, and I just felt called to be a doctor. I was in the wrong school at the wrong time, but thankfully had some decent grades. But when God has a will and a plan and you say yes, somehow it works. It took me 3 tries to get into med school, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I read that wrong. But when I finally got in, I remember very distinctly in the first year, one of the small group classes was like, it's time to check your morals at the door. And I thought, well, I don't really have very many, so okay. And so I just drank the Kool-Aid. Like I went to the NARAL club and the pro-choice club. My mother, on my first date when I was 15, told me, just don't get pregnant. The insurance doesn't cover it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know if I liked the guy. So, I mean, just the messages that our culture sends today, and I can only imagine they're so much more toxic than when I was a kid. So it was really after having my first child and just listening to some of the talks. I don't know if anybody got to hear the woman who gave her testimony about the 3 abortions and the living on the streets. It was just so powerful, her testimony. But really just thinking about that God calls you wherever you are. So having my own child, all of a sudden I was like, this is a child. This is a very different experience when somebody else is telling you, like, be pro-choice without that sort of experience. Really, I think one of the things that we deny people, I was taught to teach women, oh, you're pregnant? Well, you have 3 choices, keep it, abort it, or adopt it. And I was thinking now, like, okay, it's not an it. One, you're already a mother, and nobody tells you this. And this is why I think we have so much pain later on in life, because eventually at some point in time that catches up with the woman. So I think it's just being honest and having a lot of integrity and courage and praying and asking for the Spirit to give you the language that you need to reach out in charity to the people in front of you. Because that's what God did to me, right? So I had my first child in medical school, realizing it wasn't a choice, it was a child. Still was probably in the pro-choice camp, got out, got my first job, and for 7 years struggled with infertility. And my reproductive endocrinologist hated me because my number one question was why. If anybody was in the NAPRO training with me, they know I asked 100 million questions because there's always an answer to why eventually. But we were blessed to have triplet daughters. So I have a 20-year-old and triplet 13-year-olds. But you can imagine life as a physician with a child and triplets was a little overwhelming. And so when my kids were about 18 months old, I remember being locked in my bathroom, because that's what you do as a mother of many children. You lock yourself in the bathroom to get a peace, despite the fingers coming into the door. And I just prayed. I was like, Lord, I don't know what you're asking of me. I'm completely broken. There's nothing here. Like, I've got nothing left to give. And I was just covered in the most beautiful light that was love, and realized, like, that was all that this life is about, is love. And while I may fail at that many moments in my life, I always try and go back to that well of, it's all about love. And anytime I feel hate creeping in, I have to go back to, like, nope, somebody loved you when you were down. And so that's the next message that I would probably share with you guys, because God loves all of us. After that, I realized, my daughter was about kindergarten. She came home with little infant feet, the prolife pins. And she came home, she's like, I had put her in Catholic school. That was another grace of God. And she came home, she was like, Mom, do you know Bill Clinton kills babies? I was like, Bill Clinton doesn't kill babies, honey. What are they teaching you at that school? And so then I decided I better figure out what they were teaching her, and just started to learn the faith, because I think it's Fulton Sheen that says most people who hate the church just hate what they think the church is. They don't really know what the church teaches. So once you start learning what the church teaches, it's unfathomably beautiful, because any question that I had, and I have many, the church has been studying human history for 2,000 years, and it has an amazing, beautiful answer if you just go to look for it. So as I was growing deeper in my faith, I realized, okay, I shouldn't be just this quasi-Catholic. I should be a confirmed Catholic. And so, like Dr. Poehailos, when I went to confession, God bless our priests, especially when they're faithful, I said, and wasn't in my list of things to confess, was, I prescribe even though I don't use Father. And as he chokes on the other side of the confessional, he says, well, I don't know if I can forgive you for that. Are you still going to prescribe? And I was like, well, I think so. And he's like, I can't forgive you for that. You have to come back next week. I have to consult others. But to sit with that sort of thought on your soul of, like, oh, you mean something I'm doing might have eternal consequences? Whether or not it was the right thing for him to do or not, it was the biggest grace in my life, because all of a sudden, all this stuff, like if you listen to Christopher West's last talk, like everything you think about, you sort of have to feel in your heart. And so that was the beginning of my conversion. And at first I was like, I'm going to champion informed consent. Like, do you know how this birth control pill works? Do you know that it's, abortifacient? Like, this is how it works. And most of the time I would just watch the information, like, kind of go over their head. That's fine, doc, just give me the pill. And then again, every prescription I wrote, it was just like another knife in my heart. And finally I got to the point where I was like, okay, Lord, you're asking me to not prescribe. I'm not going to prescribe. And then you realize how ill-prepared most physicians are to treat women's health problems without a birth control pill or an IUD. So it was 6 months of discomfort and not knowing how to treat women who came to me until I found the Pope Paul VI Institute. And that was another 2x4 moment, because every time I got in the car, there was a commercial, because EP1 was being offered in Minnesota. And it was like, are you a Catholic doctor looking to help women health authentically and not wanting to prescribe the pill? And I was like, oh my gosh, I must have heard that commercial 150 times. And finally I called and I was like, okay, I'm called to sign up for this. And the timing didn't work out. And then I was like, okay, where's the next one? California? Sure, sign me up for that one. Oh, nope, that didn't work out. Where's the next one? Nevada? Okay, sure, I'll try that one. Nope, that one didn't work out. So finally I ended up in Omaha, and it was really just a beautiful journey. And a source of frustration, actually, because sitting in that class going, geez, why didn't anybody teach me this? I mean, I learned it in medical school, but nobody taught me how to apply the information I learned. So this is not new stuff. If you're going to go back and talk to your doctors, this is stuff they know, they just don't know how to apply it. And I think part of the other conversion piece is just how powerful patients are. So if you truly have a doctor that listens to you, many of the most powerful things along those times were just the patients that were praying for me and would tell me they were praying for me. Somebody gave me Janet Smith's Contraception, Why or Why Not. Very powerful CD to just drop at your doctor's office. just that Christian witness. So I had one mom, my daughter was Irish dancing at the time, who was in the car, was like, oh, I've planned all my children. She had 7. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you planned all of them. This is not where I was at the time. And she's like, well, when you're ready to see the truth, you will see it. And I was like, oh, I know the truth. So again, it's good to laugh at yourself in humility and to realize how much the Holy Spirit does play a role. And prayer is a huge part of the journey. If this is your goal here today, to try and figure out how to help providers sort of at least be friendly would be the first part, and then maybe consider conversion, because the truth really always does percolate to the top. It's a beautiful thing to unfold. It is, again, not without challenges. I have been blessed that I've been able to stay in the same job that I've been in since I started. I credit that to the fact that I work with a lot of Catholics, even though they might not be practicing. And God's grace, like, I'm a seed. And as my spiritual director said, sometimes, April, your job is just to dance until somebody loses their head. I was like, thanks, Father. Okay. But through everything, God gives you the words and the Spirit and what you need. So that's my story. I'd be happy to answer questions at the end.
So I'm Mary Devanport. I graduated from Tufts Medical School. I did my residency at UC San Diego in OBGYN. I've been in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area for the last more than 20 years. I'm in solo practice, and about 20 years ago I converted in my practice and in my life to an NFP only practice. So let me tell you something about my background. I was born in Minneapolis, and I think the most important thing that happened to me in my childhood is my father died when I was 8. And I was a believer in God, a kind of Christian, a Protestant Christian with a very simple child's faith, but I became an atheist when I was 8, and actually very angry, maybe for the next 20 years or something like that. I couldn't understand how God did that to me. But like lots of young women who have lost their father through death, divorce, or other circumstances, I kind of fell into a, hate to use the word, promiscuous lifestyle, starting in late high school and in college. And I had an intellectual bent, so I intellectualized it. And with Freudian theory and various adults who subscribe to theories of sexual liberation, I embraced this. And so throughout college, I did not enjoy this. I did not have good relationships. I was very empty, depressed, sad inside, and yet somehow I thought this was something I was supposed to do. And that movie that we saw last night, Unprotected, I could totally relate to. I think I still have not gotten over all the wounds that happened in that time of my life. I don't even think I've already confronted everything. So I was actually on birth control pills from the age of 17 to 35, and they allowed me to have different boyfriends, to go to medical school, longer-term relationships after that. Also, I didn't figure out until much later, they caused lowering of sex drive, lack of enjoyment of sex, chronic depression. I didn't figure that out for about 15 or 20 years. But at any rate, I did succeed in getting into medical school, and somehow rationalized all of this with an interest in OBGYN. And I actually really, this was a little bit pre-Roe v. Wade, or it was around the time of Roe v. Wade, and I actually really was a believer in abortion. And so some of this was from sort of pregnancy scares of my friends and that kind of thing. And so actually, as part of my medical school application, I put down that I wanted to do abortions, and I was committed to this in women's health care. So actually, most of the medical schools I applied to really approved of this at this point in time. So that was actually part of my identity and something that I used in order to get into medical school. So throughout medical school and most of my residency, I had a boyfriend. We actually even, so went through most of medical school, went through our residency together, and a couple years after that, I became very deeply depressed and didn't know what to do after all of that. And I actually never confronted abortion until, it wasn't something I did until after my residency. Somehow we just weren't doing that in my residency. There was one occasion actually where there was a late-term abortion that was a horrific experience for the house officers that were involved in it, and we refused. It actually was a baby that was sort of near term, and we had been lied to by the attending who wanted to make UC San Diego an abortion center, so we revolted, and then we were never confronted with having to do that again, and somehow we weren't doing early abortions in our residency. And at that point, I think our professors thought that you didn't have to have special training for that. It was just a D&C, so if you were doing miscarriages, if you were going to do that in your residency, you would get overwhelmed with it. So I wasn't actually confronted with doing abortions until I worked for Kaiser Permanente in Portland, Oregon. And I started kind of getting sick when I was doing abortions, and there was abortion day once a month, and it was bothering me, and a lot of other things in my life were bothering me. And I didn't have any kind of spiritual orientation at that time. And I actually went to a weekend or a week-long seminar at Esalen, which is sort of a new age center, and got exposed to a lot of different spiritual disciplines, meditation, breathing, and that kind of thing. But somehow in the mix of that was a Mother Teresa tape where she was in Bombay speaking to people of all kinds of spiritual disciplines, but she was very, very strong against abortion and contraception. Now, I was not ready to hear the contraception point, but the abortion point, it really, really hit home. And based on that, I decided I wasn't going to do abortions anymore. And that I totally needed to change my life. And so I moved out from my boyfriend of 8 or 9 years, moved to the Bay Area, took up a practice of Tibetan Buddhism, worked briefly in a couple jobs, employed at Highland Hospital, and then developed my own OBGYN practice as a solo practice. And at that point, it wasn't that hard to do. You could just go to the bank and take a loan and get insurance contracts, and there weren't very many women, so I was successful early on. And but I didn't do abortions. And so that was very unusual for the San Francisco Bay Area, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago. There's some parts of the country where just about every single OBGYN physician does abortions. I think New York is one like that, and the San Francisco Bay Area is like that. And so somehow I started getting big families and women who had 6, 7 children, who were very pro-life, Catholics and evangelical Christians, and I thought, what's going on? How come I'm getting all the, I hadn't met people like this. I hadn't met people with big families and with that kind of Catholic witness, with that kind of Christian witness. And some of them gave me a Bible. It was fascinating. And then also seeing their relationships and their children who were well-mannered and disciplined. And I said, could you just tell me how come, and some of them were traveling a ways to come to me from, I was in the East Bay, and they were coming from San Francisco and some ways away. And I said, how come you're coming to me? And they said, well, you're on the good list of the Archdiocese. I said, there aren't very many doctors who don't do abortions. I think there are only 2 or 3, so you're the closest one. So that just shocked me. I couldn't even imagine myself, you know, sort of this demi-mondaine, you know, 30-year-old, but I was on the good list of the Archdiocese. So that took a little while to swallow, but after a while, the patients had a big influence on me. And of course, some of them wanted to expose me to natural family planning. And so I did end up going to a conference. Well, now the other thing that happened is I got married and had a son, and a ministry, a evangelical ministry, reached out to sort of pagan people in Berkeley, and so I became a born-again Christian, an evangelical Christian, and went to a Baptist church, and that was a huge life change. But anyway, getting to how I changed my practice to NFP, that, you know, the abortion part was the first part, but I became exposed in a conference to people doing natural family planning. And at this Family Life conference, I met Joe Stanford and asked him, this is really fascinating stuff. You know, I had never learned any of this in medical school. Where can I learn more of this? He referred me to the Pope Paul VI Institute. And then Murphy Goodwin was there, and now he was a perinatologist, a very different kind of practice than mine, but there was an actual OBGYN who didn't prescribe contraception. And I think by that point, I had already had my son, I had given up the pill, I had realized that it had a bad effect on me, and mainly my brain. So I was really interested in this. Spiritually, it was kind of a long journey to the Catholic Church and fully embracing everything. I had sort of the first part of my conversion spiritually into evangelical Christianity. Then I thought I was straight on a trajectory to become a Catholic, and I enrolled my son in Catholic school. And on a retreat near Santa Cruz, I thought I was going to a Catholic bookstore, but it was Conciliar Press bookstore. It turned out to be Eastern Orthodox bookstore, and somehow I just got fascinated in this, went to my divine liturgy on the Feast of the Transfiguration the next day, playing hooky from my evangelical summer camp, and had an experience during the Divine Liturgy where I just fell to the floor weeping. It was just quite an extraordinary occurrence. And so I thought God was answering the question, lead me to the right church, and then I ended up in the Eastern Orthodox Church for a while. So I stayed there and went to an Eastern Orthodox church, and that was very good for my spirituality in many respects. And I started going to confession. And then one of the things that happened to me was confessing, providing contraceptive pills. From the Eastern Orthodox point of view, I actually already felt they were wrong because of the abortifacient effect. But also I was seeing that they were messing up all the young women that I was prescribing them to. And that was a good part of my medical practice. The annual exams, the pill prescription, easy, you know, $150 or $100, whatever it was, you know, you would do for your annual exam and send somebody out the door. And it just help facilitate this lifestyle, you know, that was destructive. So, I mean, I was already seeing that this was bad. And I was confessing that again and again and again. So, you know, you're not supposed to do that. If you recognize, you know, if it's something really bad, you need to stop. So I didn't know how to do that. But eventually, it took a couple years, but I ended up at the training at Pope Paul VI Institute. And I couldn't at that time foresee giving up contraception in my practice, but once I was there, I met wonderful people and wonderful physicians who had already done that and had that conversion. And luckily, I did have one partner at that point, but it wasn't an obstacle. I was in solo practice. I wasn't really accountable to anybody except my patients. So I actually entered that program as an auditor. They wouldn't have certified me unless I had given up contraception, but I made the decision mid-program to give up prescribing contraception. And I did it. They said there were two ways to do it. You can do it all at once, or you can do it over a year, maintaining your relationship with the patient. So I chose the year-long method, and some of them got mad at me, but anyway, I got other people. So my medical practice has been, I would say, absolutely graced by the education I got at Pope Paul VI, and then the friendship and collegiality with all the other NFP physicians that I've been in contact with throughout the United States and basically the world. And what happened to me as an Eastern Orthodox, I was taking all of my direction from the Catholic Church. My son was in Catholic school. I was attending Moderator and various Catholic organizations in Rome. And eventually, Greg Polito, you may know him, he was head of the California Association of Natural Family Planning. And he said, how come you're not Catholic? You're following all the teachings. Why aren't you in the church, that understands natural law, that understands marriage, the relationship between men and women, and its relationship to contraception? I was very challenged by that. And then challenged by my son when we were at the Vatican with John Paul II. And my son said, Mom, can't we just be Catholic? And I said, all right, And so we converted shortly after that, actually at an Eastern Catholic church in Ukiah, California, where I knew the priest with a profession of faith, and left the Orthodox Church and became Catholic at that point. But I have to say that FertilityCare, Naprotechnology, it's been a wonderful experience providing that over the last, how long has it been? 20 years, I guess. 20 years since I completed my training. Okay. All right. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Oh, why don't we,
I think they'd like you to use the mic because it
Yeah.
helps with the tape.
right.
Works. To preach, to teach, and to bless the Dominican way. I'm a Dominican laity as well. Yes. So thank you all very, very much. What my question is that I noticed that all three of you have something in common, and that is that your conversion came after you fulfilled your profession. What happens to those of us who want to continue to learn, perhaps to get a practitionership in nurse practitioner, and you're trying to go to a Catholic college, and as you know, many of the Catholic colleges are advocating birth control. Not abortion necessarily, but birth control. And it's hard to get into a program that doesn't ask you to advocate that. So where do you stand as a person who wants to continue that pathway?
So part of the large organization I work for, we have PAs and nurse practitioners come and shadow along with us, and I tend to attract the ones that want a Catholic-only practice or an NFP-only practice. My observation is it's really going to be a challenge, I think, as a MD or DO, because there are fewer of us, and the training is so much more involved that if we have the idiosyncrasy to change our practice, we still get to stay. I think this is where it's, I'm not going to make the Bible verse correctly, but be sly as the fox. You do your application. I've seen it done two ways. You do your application where you're not lying, but you might not be as forthcoming just to get into the program, if that makes sense. I've also seen people just in the forefront say, this is my beliefs and I'm not going to violate them. Both have gotten in, so on either ways, because they've ended up in my office as part of their training. you will have to go through training that you might not agree with. It's just also part of the training, and you try and hold your moral ground wherever you can. And that's how I've seen people walk through it, whether they've come through their training kind of already well formed and maintained it all the way throughout, had a conversion part way through. But I do think there's probably a little bit of a bent to keep people out. And so that's where I think you have to be sly as a fox, if that makes sense, and just pray.
I know it is kind of a path that other people have trodden, okay? And so you have to know everything intellectually. If there's a didactic part, you know, you can do that and you just answer the questions the way they want. In the practicum, I know somebody was challenged by putting in IUDs, but you can put IUDs in plastic models. And sometimes you may not know that your supervisors and people like that may not know the rules of their organization and certification. But actually, there's quite a network of people, of Catholics, that are all around everywhere. And some of them are high up in their organization. So they're authorities you can go to, and they can tell the person at your school, no, she doesn't have to do that. She can do it in a plastic uterus, you know. And there was actually, yeah, you know, that's happened recently to people, actually, that I've heard in the San Francisco area. Someone who did a midwifery program, and we all prayed for her because she had written to her mother that she was going to get kicked out, and it was over this IUD thing, okay? And I mean, just we were able to come up with people that could tell her superiors that no, she could just do the model and that's fine. But some of these schools are afraid of being decertified or something, you know, that if they may not have personal animus toward you, but maybe they'll be decertified if they don't make you do these things. So you have to kind of know how to get around some of that. And then also, you know, we had some backup lawyers too. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Hi, my name's Susan Mcconnell Aag. I'm a fertility care practitioner in Marin County, California. And I want to say thank you to all three of you for taking the time to get up here and explain about your journeys in getting to where you are in your different practices. And I just think it's such a gift to every place that you're serving to have your presence. And I particularly thank you, Mary, because I think I was one of the first people to greet you at the conference where Dr. Stanford was there. Oh, and wow. I thought, wow, there's a doctor that is interested in coming and serving us here in the Bay Area. And you know, I just didn't really realize the depth of your journey and how much it's unfolded and how beautiful it's been. And that your literature that you've written and handed out, I don't know if other people have seen it, but I mean, it has helped me so much in my practice, you know, because you really have carefully identified different things to do with PCOS or whatever it is, and nutrition and a more of a natural approach to helping these women as well. So thanks. And couples.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name's Nidia Correa, and I'm actually a director of a pregnancy resource center that's getting ready to convert to a full medical model. So we do the ultrasounds right now. But our issue, we're in El Paso, we don't really have any OBGYNs right now that are practicing NFP only. We do have a young doctor that just came out of residency, and she's signed a contract with a hospital. She's with a private practice right now. And she actually originally went to be an OBGYN. She was very pro-life, or comes from a very pro-life family, so she has the heart. But as you've in your stories, you've heard, you know, along the way, she actually, you know, kind of lost her way, and she is with a practice that she herself prescribes contraception right now. And so she knows we've been wanting to have her hopefully come practice with us. We're not financially at the point where we can bring her in because she's a young doctor with all the medical school bills. She just recently had 2 babies. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any advice? I mean, obviously we're praying for her to take that leap and maybe to slowly start not prescribing the contraception. I mean, is there any other advice? What was the book that I missed the name of the book that you said, the first book that you read in your conversion? Dr. Karen, what?
That book was not about that journey specifically,
okay.
but it was
But it was in
Abandonment
your-
to Divide Providence.
Okay.
Dekusad, I might be pronouncing that
Okay.
wrong, was the
Yes.
author. Just more or less kind of like, I'm a control freak, and it's more one of these, Jesus, take the wheel, like much
Yes.
more elegant, but just basically
Right,
that we have
right.
to let go. There is a book One More Soul had put out, Physicians Healed, that
Oh,
had
yes.
14 or 15
Yes, I
conversion
read
stories. Mine is in there
Okay.
as a cute, and Mary's is in
Yes,
there.
okay.
As a side note, somebody brought the picture to me this week that was in that book, and the twins that are next to my picture celebrated their 21st birthday 2 days ago. So it's a little bit of an old book, but it's a good book. The stories are good.
Yes,
I mean,
we
some
have
of the
that
stories
book.
are amazingly compelling, who lost their jobs and such. At that point, I really hadn't had much of job drama at that point. My job drama had been more since then. I would say, like, does your board, like, so your board wouldn't want to bring her on unless she was NFP only,
Well-
or is it just bigger, like, how do you get her to convert overall?
I guess right now we're not even financially ready to bring her on, and so I feel like it's going to be God's timing, and hopefully when we are ready, she'll be at that point. I just want to know what we can do to encourage her, to help her get on that path and that journey, so when we're ready, that will be ready to come on.
The Janet Smith contraception,
Yes.
why not?
Okay.
And there are, if she is even vaguely interested, there are, and I could give you afterwards, there are some resources. There are secret groups on Facebook that we hide so that people don't find us and shoot us down. But I'd
Okay.
be happy to kind of help, if she's interested, to link her into some of those,
Okay.
because people who are walking the journey have joined into those kind of things,
Okay.
and there are docs who can help along with specific questions.
See, and I think that's where, because her heart is there and she knows, not for her, it's not, she just is bought into, that's a medical practice. She feels like that's the only thing she can do. She needs financially, she needs the money. So I think some support like that would be great.
And hopefully
Okay.
she has a priest who's supporting her. The interesting thing, when I went to that memorable confession and went through all this, he was so stunned, and I thought it was your bulletin announcement. It's the problem here. But by the time it was done, he wanted me to talk to the diocesan theologian, because he was worried that maybe I really wasn't called to lose my job in case I would have lost it. I didn't. But he got a little, bless his heart, he got a little bit flustered. I don't think he'd ever had a doctor do this before. And at the end, he was like sending me out to talk to the theologian. I'm like, Father, you never gave me absolution. I don't want to do this twice. So I was like, you have to give me absolution before I walk out of the room here.
Yes.
But if she has a priest who's supporting also, that's huge. I love seeing the priests who are here.
Yes.
And I know for the times where I was really ready to throw in the towel, it would be a priest who would say, yes, you can scream, I'm sorry, but yeah, this is still the truth. And it's still, and they would say to me,
Right.
this is still the truth, right? It's
Right.
tough, but yeah. And at the moment, I'd just be like, I'd like to have
Right.
my exit ramp. But in the long run, it was better for me.
Right. Okay. I love that you said that. I wrote that down, in fact, for her to have a spiritual director, and that would help her strengthen her in her walk.
I think if you've noticed, all three of us have kind of talked about
Yes.
confession and priest.
Yes, I
because
loved
think
that. Yes. It
you
was a
can't
big
do this
part of
alone.
that. Right. So, and thank you to the three of you for sharing your stories and for the journey that you've taken. It's such a great for you all to serve as the role models for this young doctor, exactly that, is,
So
trying to
is
take this step.
is this a part-time job you have at your center, or is it a volunteer position?
Well, right now, we're actually going to try to bring in a nurse practitioner for 2 days. It would be a paid position. And she has already said that she'll come volunteer one day, because with her contract and everything, she says she wants to come in, and she says, I can come in for a day. It's going to be volunteer.
If you keep up your friendship and exposure to you, that's, I can't speak highly enough of the friendship
Okay.
of patients and other people and
Yes.
other providers, and just the continual contact and encouragement.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you all so much.
And I would be happy if you want to talk afterwards. I could go into more
thank you.
details, because my position was invented this year.
Okay.
And
Oh,
we're not even sure where it's going to land at the end, but I'd be happy to share contact info to let you know how we
Thank
develop
you.
this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. God bless you all.
Okay.
Is it almost time?
We're
Should-
fine. We have
we should
another
still okay?
few minutes. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that the science of how bad you felt from the pill and all that we've got now building up, showing the link to breast cancer, is that ever going to get to the point where that will be a reason why doctors will stop prescribing? I mean, I know it's kind of rhetorical, but like, do you have any sense for the science ever helping you guys to?
So the science is there. It used to be that it wasn't a good enough journal, but in the last 2 or 3 years, the New England Journal has some pretty landmark papers about women with migraines with auras have higher risks of stroke on birth control pills, so it's a contraindication. There's a big article on pulmonary embolism and DVT, and there's another article on cardiovascular outcomes being worse. The problem is we all look through the world through our lenses, and so I really did like Christopher West's comment that theology of the body is our new glasses to look through the world of the dignity of the human person. And we're currently living in a world that doesn't understand that. So when these landmark papers come out, you get commentaries from lots of prominent physicians saying, you know, I know the paper says this, but really it's not that big of a deal when you think about it, and really the benefits are so much better. And nobody's really saying, okay, but the incidence of ovarian cancer is so low and the incidence of breast cancer is so high that even a small percentage increase affects a large amount of the population. So I am a big believer truth does percolate to the top and eventually it all becomes clear, but we are living in very cloudy times.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Uno mas.
Hi, I'm Agnes Beyer, moving from Temple, Texas to St. Louis. And I want to thank you so much for sharing. And I want to encourage anybody that can encourage anybody. This is a long journey. And when I read Physicians Heal, that's one of the things that struck me, how it takes decades in some cases for the conversion to go in little pieces here and there. And I'm also reminded of, and I don't know the name of the physician, but he performed a lot of abortions, and he tells a story, I think it was to Lila Rose, how there was one particular patient who came just once a year for her annuals. And all she did every year is bring him a plate of cookies. And just an encouragement, someday, doctor, you are going to stop performing abortions. And I just know that you're going to see the truth someday. And she kept being friendly and believing, not condescending, but loving. And I think that's what we can do to that doctor. And if anybody wants to sponsor her to go to St. Paul, the sixth, I'm going to call it St. Paul. So call Paul the Sixth Institute and get the NAPO training now, even before she could ever really want to use it. Why not? She has her toolbox before she needs it, right? So thank you very much.
Well, I think the Pope Paul VI Institute training is phenomenal. It's 2 weeks long. It's a lot of time out of a busy physician's schedule. The FEM training is a 3-day weekend in New York City. So that might be something, and CME dollars are offered usually. And I met an OB there at one of the training who didn't perform abortions, but was totally happy prescribing and didn't have any qualms about it, didn't think anything of it. But part of her conversion journey is like we sat and had dinner at Chipotle, and I just sort of like blood like I usually do, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, hopefully that wasn't too much sharing. And she now no longer prescribes. And really it's the data that the data, and when you know what to do differently than what you've been trained, gives you the tools you need to think about practicing differently.
I want to ask you, does the FEM have the requirement that you don't prescribe? They don't, right? They're like the European programs. Maybe you could explain that a little more. I think there's some benefit to those programs.
So without putting myself in hot water, which I tend to do, Every program has its gift, and every woman is called to find a different program. And so as a primary care clinician, I try and meet women where they're at. Some women can take lots of time, and other women just need a 2-day method, so you have to sort of meet the gamut. And my goal as a primary care provider is to really be an expert on all models of NFP so that I can help them with wherever they are at. The Pope Paul VI Institute is phenomenal in its training, groundbreaking in its training, probably unmatched in its education program and what it offers. However, for physicians who are in transition, might not be Catholic, might not want to sign on to all the ethical requirements, or maybe in transition, there's a way to present this information in a shorter period of time to at least get them along the journey further, if that makes sense. So there are lots of options.
You can answer this after if you want, because I'm 17 and my question, I don't know how relevant it'll be for other people, but I go to public school and I just know a lot of people who are on the pill, so many of my peers, and it's just super normal. And for me, obviously, it's faith and science that come together to give me the answer why that's wrong, but I just feel the need to inform them somehow, and I don't know if I feel that they're not as receptive when they think I'm coming from a faith, or when they know that I'm coming from a Catholic perspective. And I just want to know if you think there's what way I can present that, if I can or should.
I'll start on this one. I bet some of your friends shop for organic foods or non-GMO, but yet they don't look at these chemicals as a problem. Because I'd have patients forget to mention it at the urgent care when I'd say, what medications are you on? Nothing. And then I'd be saying, if they were in for something and I'd say, oh, well, do you have any possibility to be pregnant? Oh, no, I'm on the pill. Or, oh, no, I have a Mirena. And I'm like, hang on, that's a medication. So you might want to try from the, crunchy granola standpoint, that this would be a way to learn to know your body. That's another thing, women empowerment, get to know your body, but also not the chemicals, because if you read the list of things that are in birth control pills, and if you realize that according to World Health, it's a class 1 carcinogen, and World Health isn't a Catholic group, so that you could take that as objective data, that here's another way to look at the same issue you're looking at, without the chemical risk and without throwing chemicals in the water. If your friends are into fish, that's another way to go at it. In other words, I've sometimes approached patients from the definitely non-faith, more this is healthier for you, this is healthier for the planet kind of perspective, and gotten some traction there.
So one of the patients that I had that was probably also instrumental in my conversion was a 17-year-old who came with her first case of herpes outbreak, and how devastated that was for her. And sort of this false bill that we sell that, oh, if you do all things right, you'll be protected. That's why that Unprotected movie was kind of enlightening. I believe young women who are sexually active at a young age probably are looking for something. They're really looking for a guy to nourish them in a way that they haven't been at some level. And I think speaking to their heart, you want this guy to love you, and you think you're getting it by this, and you think you're doing it because you will be protected by the pill. But really, I wonder if you weren't on the pill, if he stuck around, what would that say to you? Would it say that he loves you more? Because I think that's probably more where they're coming from. I mean, yeah, some of them are pretty into their health, and you can talk about stuff like that, but at 17, that's kind of not where their head is. I don't really think long-term at 17, you might, but most of them aren't. But really what they're thinking about is, how do I get my needs met? And it's really through what they think is the love of this boy in their life. And unfortunately, most 17-year-old boys aren't there for the long haul.
Thank you, everybody.